Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Reaper Minis TV. This episode is going to be full of Dark Heaven Legends reviews, so we'll get right to it. First up is another entry in the Townsfolk range. This one is a Pillory and two kids. You've got a guy who is in the stocks, and he doesn't look very happy at all. You can see some rotten fruit that is pegged around his head and elsewhere on the stock, and you've got your two bratty kids who are throwing more fruit at him. All three of the sculpts are good and required very little in the way of cleaning. I'm just not sure exactly what I'll be using them for. They would obviously make a good centerpiece as part of a diorama. You could use them in a Mordheim game maybe, or in Cadwallon as some kind of centerpiece in the town square or something like that. I just haven't figured it out for myself yet. Next up is a Dragonette model, and this is a single-piece miniature of a large winged beast that doesn't have any legs, but there's a long tail that connects down to the ground, and I believe this is the first miniature, at least the first one that I remember, from the Dark Heaven Legends line that comes with a Slotta base instead of an integrated kind of broccoli base is what they're called. The wings and tail could all be bent a little bit if you want to alter the pose, and it does look like it would fit in with a Reptus army or maybe a Lizardman army in Warhammer Fantasy Battle pretty easily, so you have some uses there. You could definitely use it as a monster in D&D or Pathfinder. Good all-around figure here, but also one that you need a pretty specific use for. It didn't really need much cleaning at all. There was a little bit of flash here and there, a slight mold line that was visible on the underside of the wings, but really not too much to speak of at all. These next two guys are probably my favorites out of the current batch of Dark Heaven Legends that we're looking at right now, and these are two Black Orc Warriors. I'm in the process of building a large Orc and Goblin warband for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and these guys are going to fit right in perfectly. They could also find a home in a Revan army for Warlord. You could use them in an Orcs and Goblin army for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And while each one needed a couple of minutes worth of cleaning, there's flash here and there are some mold lines, there are little bits of extra metal from the casting process, so you're going to spend a little bit of time cleaning these guys up, but I think they're well worth it. I like the models a lot. The only thing that kind of turns me off a tiny bit is that their stance is really wide. I tend to rebase all my figures onto either 20mm or 25mm squares for most fantasy games, and even on a diagonal, I'm not quite sure if these guys are going to fit on a 1-inch square or 25mm square base. So other than that, I love them. They're wonderful. They're going to overhang a little bit off the base, I'm afraid. Next up is an elf pirate. Her name is Lauren Silversail, and man, is she showing off a lot of cleavage. I suspect this is a decent enough way to distract other pirates that she's fighting, and she's got a large cutlass in her left hand. Her right hand is down on her hip. She's wearing very loose clothing that she's almost falling out of, as you can see. A little sort of mini skirt to go along with the open blouse that she's wearing. She has long hair that's kind of waving in the wind towards her left-hand side in a fairly on-guard pose, like she's ready to get into a fight, but not really at that point yet. It's a good crisp and clean sculpt that had a little bit of cleanup necessary. There was a mold line along the sword and also running down both legs, but really not too much else. She cleaned up fairly quickly. And I think she might do well in a Pirates-themed army for War Machine and also in a variety of other fantasy games. Next up is a Warg, and this is another model that's going to make a good addition to my growing Orc and Goblin warband for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And it's a giant wolf. It's a single-piece miniature. The fur is exceptionally well done. It looks outstanding just from any angle. It has a snarling look on its face, and you can easily drop it onto a plastic cavalry base if you want to. You could leave it on the base that it's sculpted part of. You could put it on a 40mm square or round base with ease, and it looks like it'll paint up quickly and easily. It should look great, and like I said, it's going to get dropped into a band of orcs and goblins for me. You could use it in a fantasy RPG as part of a wilderness encounter. You could use it as the pet of some kind of spellcaster or maybe a druid or barbarian. Just an all-around really good giant wolf. This next pack is more of an accessory pack to customize your miniatures, and you get 5 different sets of fairy wings. 2 of the sets of wings are single-piece sculpts that you could glue right onto the back of a miniature that has no armor or very little in the way of back covering. The other 3 sets each have 2 separate wings that will need to be clipped off of a casting tab and glued into place. The largest of the sets has a couple of little pegs that you would use if you drill out 2 holes in the back of the miniature and stick these in, just for some added stability. The smallest set has some tiny little pegs that you would use to drill out some voids into the back of a miniature so you could glue them on. And the middle set doesn't really have the same kind of pegs on it, so it might be a little harder to attach to the back of a miniature. It took me a little while to think about what could I really use these for, and then I started thinking that this might make a really neat addition to some spellcasters or champions in a Wood Elf army. It could really make them stand out as unique. Next up is Kasham. It's a Reptus Wizard, and this is a release of a single-piece miniature that was in the Dragon Men of Varanidar box set that we looked at not too long ago. He's now on his own, and this is a spellcaster that carries a staff in his left hand, and he's got a potion in his right hand. Along his sash, you can see there are several pouches. He has an ornate belt, and his staff is what really stands out for me the most on the model. It's a long staff that has some jewels and decorations around the shaft. There's a bell at the top of it, and it sort of splits into a V or a U-shaped at the top. There are also some trinkets that are tied on what look like leather straps that are on the staff itself. I would almost say it's worth getting the miniature if you want to cut off the hand and the staff to use it on another model, like a Chaos Sorcerer, something like that. I may go ahead and do that for my son's Warriors of Chaos army, just to make him have a sorcerer that stands out with a neat-looking staff. And it would also not be too much trouble if you went ahead and cut off the staff to replace the left hand and arm with another model's sword or shield or some kind of other weapon or implement. You might not find a left hand that looks exactly like the Dragon Man's claw hand there, but I don't think it would be too much trouble either. Next up is a guy called Carly Diedrich. He's a wizard, and he's dynamically posed where he's got his longsword in his right hand and a staff in his left hand. The staff is kind of gnarled and curved, and it also has some trinkets that are lashed to it. The sword is a little bit thin and was bent in the blister when I got it, but I was able to get it back into shape without a problem at all. He's wearing a lot of clothing. There's almost no skin showing on the model at all, except for his face, but a lot of that is covered with a heavy beard and mustache. There are a couple of pouches on his belt along with another dagger or short sword, and cleanup was limited to a couple of mold lines that were visible under his arms and then under the bottom side of his cloak and then again over the top of his hood. But really just about a minute and those were all cleaned up. He'd make a very good wizard, I think, for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Obviously any other kind of role-playing game also, but I'd like to see him in my Warhammer campaign as soon as one of my players is good enough to go ahead and just die instead of just going insane and lingering on and continuing to fight chaos. So, no, just kidding there. Hopefully I'll get to see him in the game, but whenever one of my players is ready. This next blister is called Murder of Crows, and it comes in 2 pieces. The smallest piece is a set of 2 different crows that attaches to the larger piece, and then as you can see, a chain of crows towers up and it looks like they're flying around the remains of about half of what looks like a pirate whose body has been picked pretty clean by the crows. The one that is sitting closest to him looks like he has one of the pirate's eyeballs kind of hanging out of his mouth, so they've done a good job working over the remnants of this pirate. The miniature itself does not come with the square base that I've got it photographed here with. I put it on there to add some stability because it seemed a little top and back heavy. I'm sure if I filed down the underside of the base, I could flatten it out a little more and not have any kind of issue, but I'm also not going to leave it on the square base. I'm going to be putting it into my Vampire Counts army as part of an elaborate base that my general is going to be part of. So I think the most obvious use of this is as part of a diorama, not really a miniature on its own, but as part of a miniature or something else that you're putting on a larger, maybe decorative base. And the last miniature we're going to take a look at for this episode is a bard. His name is Alfred Redlute, and you can see that he's carrying a lute, which fits his name. I bet it gets painted red whenever I paint it or somebody else does. Along his belt on the backside, there are a couple of scroll cases. There's a small flask on his right side at his belt and a short sword or a long dagger on his left side. He looks like he's in mid-strum and mid-song as he's playing his lute, which he's probably more doing in an inn or tavern or town square rather than down a dungeon hallway. He's wearing a puffy shirt and really only required a tiny bit of cleaning before he was ready to be primed. Thanks for watching this episode, everybody. We'll see you next time.